Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. My goodness, it's been too long, but here we go, and today we are reviewing the Focke-Wulf 190 D-12, a German fighter aircraft coming to tier 4 and a battle rating of 6.3. For today's historical overview, as we've already covered the history behind the D9 variant of the Focke-Wulf 190, available to you using the link in the top right corner of your screen, as displayed now, our history shall cover the variants between the D9 and the D12 and then focus on the D12. We begin in August of 1944, with the delivery of the D9 to the Luftwaffe beginning in this month. The first two examples on the Focke-Wulf plant at Cottbus were completed as the only examples of the D10 variant. Compared to the D9, the D10 was powered by a Junker-Jumo 213C engine driving a VS-19 air screw. This combination allowed a propeller shaft weapon to be mounted. Meanwhile, the combination in the D9 for reference, i.e. the Junker-Jumo 213A engine and the VS-111 air screw, did not permit this. The D10 was armed with a single 30mm Mk18 cannon firing through the propeller shaft and a single 20mm MG151 cannon mounted in the port wing root. Simultaneously to the D10's development, 7 Focke-Wulf 190 A8 airframes were used as prototypes for the D11 variant, which saw the fighter transition into both a fighter and a Schlachtflugzeug, known in English as an attacker. The D11 featured the following: increased armour protection for the attacker role, revised armament to two 20mm MG151 cannon as mounted in the wing roots, and two 30mm Mk108 cannon as mounted in the wings. The plane was powered by the Junker-Jumo 213F power plant with a two-stage supercharger. Based on the D11's development, it was intended that from early 1945 all new D-series Focke-Wulf 190s would serve as the dual role of interceptor and attacker. To fulfill this requirement, the D12 variant, as depicted on your screens today, appeared in factories as of February 1945. It was powered by the liquid-cooled V12 Junker-Jumo 213F1 engine, which provided an output of 1,725 horsepower or 2,020 horsepower with the plane's methanol water MW50 injection. However, the engine lacked an intercooler, weakening its performance at extreme altitudes. By comparison, the successor to this plane, technically the TA-152H, which was powered by the Junker-Jumo 213E engine, which was identical to the F1 engine but had the intercooler, had the greater performance at extreme altitudes. Additionally, for the D12, the engine cannon was up-armoured for the dual role, and the plane was armed with one 30mm Mk18 cannon, which was engine mounted, and two 20mm MG151 cannon as mounted in the wing roots. The only sub-variant of the D12 to be produced as a test aircraft was the D12R11, which had the bad weather fighter equipment mounted to it, including the PKS-12 autopilot and the FUG-125 Hermine navigational and blind landing equipment. It is believed that only 3 test aircraft were built for the D12 in total, designated under the following designations: Focke-Wulf 190 V63, V64 and V65. However, there were no actual production aircraft of the D12 that were ever released into combat service. By the end of February 1945, it was decided that the D12 would be replaced by the D13 variant, whereby this variant only differed by fielding a 20mm MG151 cannon in the engine mount instead of the 30mm Mk18 cannon. And with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the Focke-Wulf 190 D12 handles in War Thunder's arcade mode. Today's gameplay takes place on the airfield domination map Corsum. For this we'll be using the following setup: universal belts for our 30mm cannon, reasoning being that with the high fire rate and low muzzle velocity of our 30mm cannon, we need to be able to see where our rounds are going to make the most use of them, especially seeing as we only have 85 before we need a reload. Therefore, with 3 high explosive incendiary tracer rounds backed up by a single incendiary round, we have tracers on the key and most effective rounds within these belts, i.e. the high explosive incendiaries, and we'll be able to see where they are going when we open fire on a target. To back this up, we have our 20mm cannon belts loaded as stealth, as whilst they are quite potent, with 3 high explosive incendiary rounds, a single armour piercing high explosive, and a single armour piercing incendiary, the focus here is the lack of tracer attributed to these belts, meaning we can focus ever more on the tracer of our 30mm cannon. And as for our gun convergence, we are using a 500m gun convergence, as our armament is based around the centre line, with the wing root mounted 20mm cannon not being too convergence reliant compared to cannon mounted in the outer portions of the wings, such as on the Focke 490 A8 for comparison. And for our fuel load, we are using a 30-minute fuel load to make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. So we begin our review of the D-12 by discussing its climb rate. Whilst we have seen here that this plane has been able to climb from 1,200 metres altitude approximately up to, and it will hit 4,000 metres altitude before we level out, or approximately that, this climb rate, when considered by itself, is exceptional, but when considered against its battle rating contemporaries, is not by any means. Now this is because a lot of planes that you're battle rating can equal your climb, the likes including the Tempest Mark II and the M1K2JA. And there are some planes which can actually outclimb you, such as the Messerschmitt 19K4 and the Spitfire F Mark 24. Although when we say they can outclimb you, for every 1,000 metres you gain, they will gain an additional 100 to 150 metres altitude, so not too much of a margin. Having levelled out, we can see that we can build up our speed quite rapidly to intercept the SB2 M105 here. As they try to cut over the top of us, we only need to hit them with a single high explosive incendiary round from our 30mm cannon to cause their right hand wing to burst into flames, and this will kill them outright. And when we consider our straight line acceleration, it is on a level heading towards that of a Tempest Mark II, whereby this plane will accelerate from its stall speed of 170 km an hour up to a speed of 475 km an hour without war emergency power very rapidly, and you can extend this threshold to 570 km an hour with war emergency power included. Now we dive down towards an F82 E-twin Mustang, going into a boom and zoom roll, which the Focke 490 D-12 is well suited for. As we come down here, notice how until we get close to the F82 we're not hitting the target, or only grazing it, but as soon as we get within 230 metres we cut them to pieces for our second kill. And whilst we would like to carry through on this Lancaster, our friendly Griffin Spitfire is going to rocket them to pieces, or at least it would seem that way from noticing how the Lancaster disintegrated. We will come to very shortly why we need to get in close to hit our targets. For the time being, however, let us consider the energy retention of the D-12 in a boom and zoom pass. Now in the zoom climb portion, we can see how we are regaining altitude at a sufficient rate, and we're not bleeding too much speed off as we do so, and we're not having to use WEP here in order to go back into our zoom climb. The D-12 retains its energy very well when coming out of boom and zoom passes, and this makes it a very tricky plane to pursue, especially when it dives down from 1,000 metres above you and then zooms back up. Even the likes of the Tempest Mark II and even the jet planes such as the P-80A Shooting Star will have trouble keeping up with you, unless they attack you on a level footing in the first place. But still, when you go into a dive, you can run with the likes of the Tempest Mark II, and there will be planes such as that which will be able to keep up with you. And the likes of the jet fighters such as the P-80 Shooting Star will outrun you in the long haul, as they have the capacity to build up higher top speeds in their dive. But your dive speed acceleration is very good, and as a result this means you can use dives to get away from foes who are on your 6th, such as an F8F-1B Bearcat. And you will need to do this because the majority, if not all of the foes you will encounter, i.e. your single engine prop equivalents, will be able to outmaneuver you in the midst of a turn fight. The turn circle of the D-12 is very wide in my experience. It is perhaps the widest of the single engined prop fighters, and as a result you need to resort to staying away from turn fights and fights based around manoeuvrability, as you do have an incredibly high roll rate, if not the highest of your battle rating, and this means you can avoid incoming fire when opponents are trying to dive on you by simply switching direction underneath them. By outturning them, consider flying a different aircraft. We now converge on an F8F-1 Bearcat here, catching them completely by surprise. As we get in close once again, we note how we are only hitting the target once we get to approximately 220 metres from them. We're now going to see why we're not too accurate. Notice the Bearcat stalling out underneath us here. We are bleeding them out and we are going to use only our 20mm cannon here. We do have the 30 loaded, but we want to prove a point. We aim in, and we aim at the lead indicator, but we miss until we hit the target at approximately 220 metres once again. Now this is because the higher muzzle velocity of your 20mm cannon is not factored in on the lead indicator. The lead indicator always represents the cannon of the highest calibre. Therefore, if your 30mm cannon is loaded, it is showing the lead path for the 30mm cannon. That is why we were missing at first, and we only started to hit when we got incredibly close. As if I remember correctly, the muzzle velocity of your 20mm cannon historically was 1.5 times that of your 30mm cannon. Bit of a problem when you're looking at the lead indicator as a result. But regardless of whether you're using your 30 or your 20mm cannon, Note how you can rip targets to pieces very quickly, especially when you set them up for failure. Now we note a Yak 3 climbing up towards us and a Typhoon trying to bait us out, and a Yak 15 also charging towards us in a vertical head-on, but we heard an engine off to our 6 a minute ago, and it was a B-25 spawning in. So we decide to press back up and look around, and we note the B-25 trying to follow us. So we just take the fight into the vertical, as we have the engine power here, thanks to our Yonkoshumo engine, to stall them out. And now we're going to see the manoeuvrability of the D-12 based on its rudder and its landing flaps. Whereby the turn circle of this plane is very poor, but its ability to hammerhead over targets is very good. Especially if you do use your landing flaps and a little bit of engine control. You can snap around and cut foes to pieces as they stall out underneath you, and we do so for our ace in a day. Note there are no combat flaps on this aircraft, and indeed there are not for the Focke-Wulf series aircraft in game at the moment, so therefore using your landing flaps to cut a huge chunk of speed in an engagement can prove decisive, as we saw there. If we had not used our landing flaps and a little bit of engine control, we would have overshot the target. We now dive down on a Yak 9M here, who has gone after our TA-152C3, and we finished them off for another kill, before breaking up. So we've talked about manoeuvrability, but what about manoeuvrability with speed? What are our thresholds in this aircraft? Well, in short, we need to be concerned that once we hit 600 km an hour, all three control domains will begin to lock up, with this lock up maximising by the time you hit 800 km an hour. In particular, your rudder is the most problematic, locking up to 25% controllability by the time you hit 800 km an hour. Meanwhile, with regards to your elevator and your ailerons, these lock up to 50% at the same point. We can see here a shooting star trying to charge up towards us for a head-on from underneath. We're just going to stall them out, as we have the energy to do so here, in terms of our kinetic energy and converting it into potential energy or altitude before swinging down. As they stall out, we come down on top of them and cut them to pieces for our 7th kill. And in terms of ammo capacity, whilst you do have a low amount of 30mm cannon rounds, you have a lot of 20mm cannon rounds available. I believe 440 in total, so 220 per gun, which means you have a lot of ammunition to spare and you can hit multiple targets in a single pass if needs be, or in a single set of engagements before needing the reload. And here to show our stalling out capabilities once again, we decide to stall out a Yak 9P who was trying to go for the head-on and cut it just right so they would be fine underneath us if they tried to open fire with their cannon. And our stall speed for reference is 170 km an hour. Quite high, but manageable as we are seeing. One thing to note, that once you go to 8,000 meters altitude or more, there are planes that will outperform you at extreme altitudes, such as the TA-152H1, the F7F Tiger Cat, and the Messerschmitt 19K4. But in an altitude region of 4,000 to 6,500 meters altitude, you'll be at your most ideal in terms of acceleration and climb rate and overall handling. And that is the altitude most suited to this aircraft, much like we saw with the Focke-Wulf 190 D9 in our previous review of that a long time ago. And as we climb away, we see that the game is won, and now it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. With our 8 kills, we're able to pick up 35,630 Silver Lions and 3,992 research points. To defeat the D-12 in a given matchup, I can recommend one of two approaches. The first is to engage it in a turn fight, a very obvious one, seeing as we have iterated time and time again in this review that the D-12's manoeuvrability for a turn fight is rather poor, especially with its wide turn circle and its rather heavy elevator. Just be wary of the fact that the D-12 pilot may try to use the incredibly high roll rate of this plane, if not the highest at its battle rating, in order to try and force you to overshoot or enter a set of rolling scissors. But if you're wary of this, you will have a clear advantage from the outset. The alternative approach is a counterintuitive one. Engage the D-12 in a head-on pass. Reason being, whilst you may not have the firepower to match up to the D-12, especially seeing as its armament is based down the centre line, you will get the D-12 to kill itself, as, when going in a head-to-head situation, the typical way of avoiding incoming fire is to use a snap roll. Now, with a very high roll rate attributed to the D-12, a snap roll based on the ailerons and the elevator is not going to help it evade incoming fire. You'll typically find that the D-12 will lose its wings if it tries to evade a head-on by the usage of said type of snap roll. So instead, the D-12 pilot has to use their rudder to evade the fire. But as they do so, this makes what is already an unstable plane in terms of snap rolls a very unstable one, to the point where it will actually go into a spin at speeds of below 350 km an hour because of the addition of the rudder to the snap roll. and as this plane goes into a spin and tries to recover, you can come around for your second pass and finish it off as it sits there limp in the sky. But by avoiding these two sets of circumstances today, we're able to come second by comparison to the rest of our team, incorporating the D-12 in a very similar capacity of an interceptor as we did when we originally reviewed the Fokker 490 D9. To conclude then, we will provide a comparison, or an analogy if you will, to the Fokker 490 D9. When we originally reviewed that, we said it was a cut above the opposition, and that still stands to a good extent even with the change in battle ratings and the new planes that are added over time. But if you take a Fokker 490 D-12 and put it up to a battle rating of 6.3, what happens to the opposition? Well, the opposition becomes upgraded, they climb faster, they accelerate faster, they become more manoeuvrable, etc, etc. As a result, you have to take your D9 and upgrade it as a result, giving it a more powerful engine in order to improve its acceleration in a straight line, its ability to accelerate in the dive, and its ability to climb, and also boost its firepower to make it a more ideal interceptor. And that is what you have here, the Fokker 490 D-12, your result of providing those upgrades. So in short, by upgrading your Fokker 490 D9 and opting to go to your D-12, you are staying competitive with your opposition, but nothing more in a way. This plane is as good as it used to be, but you now have stiffer opposition to play against, and it can seem a little bit more difficult compared to what you may be used to. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care, and good luck in the skies.